vast. The email goes on. William makes the final point. I don't have time to read it all because I want your comments, but he makes the final point. We would have to make sure the bottled water companies are wholly New Zealand owned because we don't want another tranche of money flowing overseas. Is there economic feasibility in downsizing dairy, Christoph, easing environmental pressures and somehow ramping up a homegrown water industry for export?
Unfortunately, I think the idea wasn't quite thought through entirely, because the problem with water is that when we bottle it, the expensive part is not the water, but the bottling process. And if we want to ship it overseas, it becomes expensive because we have to transport it, and on reasonably inexpensive products, the transportation cost takes up a high percentage. So I believe anyway that if that was a good idea, somebody would have already done so, and the international bottled water market is fiercely competitive, so I fear that that wouldn't quite work. Also, we are currently not competing by saying if we have dairy and grow fruit, we can't bottle water. We still could because there's enough water here. So I don't think that idea would quite work as a magic solution to increase our payment of balance. But the other issue is that we do pollute too much. I always thought New Zealand should be doing a lot more than we are currently doing, given the fact that we rely so much on the primary industry and have a reasonably small population. Of course, our footprint per person is huge in New Zealand because we use so much, from fertilizers to growing fruit to emissions from cows, from growing cows. So there a lot more needs to be done. I'm actually quite pleased that this was highlighted in international reports, because maybe it's a bit of a wake-up call.
All right, Christoph, thank you. That's Dr. Christoph Schumacher. I want to give you guys a little bit of a chat before 5 o'clock about what you've heard and what you think.
Well, I think that water is a resource in the same way as oil and minerals, and I think that we can be much more formal about the way that we regulate its exploitation. And I think that, at the time that we brought in a lot of legislation about minerals, it was because there were perceived scarcities, as well as, certainly from an environmental point of view, yes, we need to know how we're extracting them. But the heat in the market is because of scarcity, and there is a scarcity of water, and we've got it. And I think that we're incredibly cavalier about, and particularly some of these councils, in just allowing it to be extracted and sent away with no return locally.
I'm sure Christoph's right that, Coke and Nestle and the big water players would simply get cheaper water from somewhere else, but
I think we're being sold out. I think the whole philosophy of materialism and corporate growth has created a cultural and spiritual vacuum throughout much of the developed world, and we all need to ask ourselves questions in the next short while about what legacy we want to leave for our children. Is it going to be a polluted ocean, or is it going to be a sustainable future? That's a choice we all have to make ourselves.
All right, so to use the cliche that everybody uses, are we killing the goose that laid our golden egg in New Zealand? Are we going to regret this in 100 years' time?
I believe so.
Unless we change
I'm much more optimistic. I think we have an abundance of sunlight and water, which means that we can reduce our reliance on fuels, but we can't take care of the social problems that we have if we don't continue to grow either. Yeah.
Good discussions today, and I thank you both for them, John Barnett and Ella Henry.
Thank you. Kia ora.
Thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you, everybody, for your company, and we're back tomorrow. Checkpoint now.
Kia ora, everyone. Tonight, the Prime Minister says the government is not going to rush into an inquiry about the allegations raised in Ihaka and John Stevenson's book, and what is everyone else saying about it. Also tonight, long-term mental health patient Ashley Peacock, who spent much of the past decade in isolation or near isolation in a mental health unit, will be released into the community. We speak to his parents, who have worked so hard for him. John Key's valedictory speech, it's taking place in about 35 or 40 minutes. We'll take it live. Why some schools say they're being forced to charge parents to enrol. And a young man who posted a shocking video to Facebook of his sister writhing and vomiting after apparently taking synthetic drugs explains why.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. The Prime Minister says New Zealand may not have access to a report that found there were no civilian casualties in raids on 2 villages in Afghanistan in 2011. A new book alleges the SAS organised and led raids in which 6 people died and 15 were injured. Mr English says the government is not going to rush into an inquiry and he's seeking more information. The Defence Force says an investigation at the time found claims of civilian deaths were unfounded. Mr English was asked whether the Defence Force would release that report.
Well, look, I simply haven't asked that question. There'll be no doubt issues of jurisdiction and whose report it is. I think what the public can be satisfied about is that the Afghan government and the coalition forces are the people who investigated the original allegations.
Bill English says both of those parties are independent of the Defence Force. A former Fisherland Paykel healthcare employee has admitted corruption-related charges. Simon William Hall pleaded guilty at the Auckland District Court today to 1 charge of obtaining by deception and 2 charges under Section 8 of the Secret Commissions Act. Carla Penman reports.
The 49-year-old's offending happened while he was an area manager in Auckland and during dealings with 2 Middle Eastern companies. The charges relate to $213,000 worth of payments Hall received, mostly from a Saudi Arabian company in exchange for letting it be a distributor, and a payment he got from a Jordanian company also so it could become a distributor. A spokesperson for Fisher & Paykel Healthcare says it became aware in 2014 of issues involving the 2 companies. An internal investigation was then carried out, Hall was fired and the matter was referred to the Serious Fraud Office. Hall is due to be sentenced in June. In Auckland, ko Carla Penman tēnei.
The man who was at the centre of a house siege near Kawerau last year has told a jury he feared for his life when armed police stormed in. Rhys Warren's on trial in the High Court in Hamilton on a number of charges, including 2 of attempted murder after 4 police officers were wounded. Mr Warren said he thought his life was being threatened by police when armed officers entered his house.
I didn't trust them because they just come into my house and shot my house up. So I didn't trust them at all. For all I know, they were just waiting to have a pop shot, take me out.
Rhys Warren says he fired at police but never intended for anyone to get hurt. The organisers of the Petroleum conference in New Plymouth say the sector's detractors prefer the limelight of protest to genuine dialogue. The chief executive of PPANZ, Cameron Madgwick, says Greenpeace and other environmental groups are invited but consistently turn it down. Mr Madgwick says it's disappointing that a blockade by protesters resulted in chaotic scenes outside the venue today. He says PPANZ respects the right of the protesters to convey their message and asks that they respect the right of delegates to attend. The protesters say the petroleum sector is deliberately delaying the transition to renewable energy. A drug rehabilitation group says a Facebook video of a young Auckland woman in a zombie state after apparently taking synthetic drugs may not put off other users. The video was posted by the woman's brother, who says he's sick of seeing what the drugs, commonly called bath salts, do to young people. It's been viewed more than 1 million times in the last 24 hours. Ben Bergzang of Odyssey House says the video raises awareness, but hard-hitting approaches are risky.
For people who are going through experimenting with substances, they can actually see it as, well, nothing's happened to me, I haven't had any harm, I'm not this bad, and it can delay them seeking help from it. And for people who aren't using, it kind of reinforces their decision not to use.
Ben Bergzang says alcohol and cannabis are still the most popular drugs for young people. Meanwhile, the man who posted the video says his sister is sober and wants to change after seeing it. It's 5:04. To sport, and the Kiwis forward Jason Taumalolo has signed one of the longest contract deals in National Rugby League history, keeping him at North Queensland until the end of the 2027 season. The NRL Player of the Year last season has signed a 10-year contract believed to be worth $11 million, putting him among the game's highest paid players. Taumalolo, who's 23, made his debut with the Cowboys in 2010 and has turned his back on pursuing a career in the NFL after after trialling in the United States in the off-season. The former All Whites captain Tommy Smith says he's thankful to be back in the national side. The Ipswich Town player hasn't played for New Zealand since 2014 after falling out with coach Anthony Hudson, but he's been recalled for the World Cup qualifiers against Fiji. Smith was seen as being uncommitted to the All Whites, but approached Hudson last year to resolve their differences.
Obviously there was a situation beforehand that got out of hand really, and I'm just delighted to be back now though, really excited to get going again after a great chat with Anthony.
Smith says he spoke with other All Whites players and was assured that there was no negativity about Smith returning. Peter Fury, the father and coach of Joseph Parker's next opponent, English heavyweight boxer Hughie Fury, has been denied entry to New Zealand for May's WBO world title fight in Auckland. Fury's application for a visa has been rejected on character grounds. In 1995, he was jailed for 10 years over drugs charges. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Lloyd Esler presents a brief history of rabbits and possums in New Zealand. Brief? That's probably been a bit optimistic. Episode 2 of our series Fathom sees Nick Harvey Waldron meeting Rose, a woman with a heart that keeps missing a beat. Sometimes it stops beating altogether. And this week's overseas correspondent is Farwa Hodali on the line from Bethlehem on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland and Auckland, cloudy periods and the odd shower in Northland. Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Gisborne, mainly fine, areas of cloud morning and evening. Waikato, Waitomo and Taupō, mostly cloudy with patchy drizzle becoming fine early tomorrow. Wairarapa and Hawke's Bay, cloud increasing with patchy drizzle developing towards evening. Taranaki to Wellington, including Taumaranui and Taihape, mostly cloudy with a few drizzle patches clearing tomorrow morning. Nelson and Marlborough, excluding the Kaikoura coast, mainly fine with areas of cloud, however isolated showers about the ranges. Kaikoura coast and Canterbury, cloudy with occasional drizzle, clearing tomorrow. For Buller and Westland, fine with high cloud. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, often cloudy with a few showers, but long fine breaks inland, fine tomorrow. The Chatham Islands mostly cloudy with the odd shower, rain for a time this evening. It's 5:05 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina, and thank you for joining us on Checkpoint. Coming up on the program tonight, Ashley Peacock, the severely autistic man who's endured years of seclusion and near seclusion at a mental health facility in Porirua, is heading somewhere better. We talked to his parents. John Key, Prime Minister for 8 years and suddenly not, is making his valedictory speech. The ban from laptops, etc., from your cabin luggage, where and why. Ivanka Trump gets the keys, the clearance and the classified stuff in the West Wing, and much more on the program. But first, the politics of hit and run. This is, of course, the Ihaka and John Stevenson book about civilian deaths and injuries in an SAS-led raid in Afghanistan. Bill English is resisting calls for an inquiry immediately. The Defence Force says an investigation at the time concluded the allegations were unfounded, and it stands by those findings. And the Defence Minister, Jerry Brownlee, and the Chief of Defence Force arrived back in Dubai this morning after an unpublicised trip to Iraq and have so far made no comment. In a moment, I asked Rhys Jones, who was then head of Army, what he believes. But first, here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
In the months following the 2010 raids, the Afghan authorities and the International Security Assistance Force reviewed the incident after the provincial governor raised concerns about civilian deaths. It concluded claims civilians were killed during the operation were unfounded, a finding the Defence Force and now the Prime Minister Bill English is standing by. Mr English was asked why in that case the Defence Force does not release that report.
Well, look, I simply haven't asked that question. There'll be no doubt issues of jurisdiction and whose report it is. I think what the public can be satisfied about is that the Afghan government and the coalition forces are the people who investigated the original allegations, and they're independent of the New Zealand Defence Force.
But if the SAS took a role in that operation, then you would expect that New Zealand authorities would have access to that report?
Well, look, we'd have to get advice about that. That'll be a legal matter.
In Parliament, Mr English responded to a question from the Labour leader Andrew Little about whether he could be sure there were no civilian deaths or injuries.
I've asked that question, and the New Zealand Defence Forces stand by the release that they put out last night, and that is that on the basis of independent investigation by the Afghan government and the coalition forces back in 2011, they believe that New Zealand Defence personnel conducted themselves according to the rules of engagement, and civilian casualties have not been substantiated.
Mr Little had further questions.
Does he know whether New Zealand personnel made any requests during the raids for fire support from the US Apache helicopters, which are alleged to have killed and injured civilians on that day?
We'll be asking for more written advice following on from the briefing today, but I think it was there's been a series of press releases actually that have outlined the fact that American helicopters were involved in the operation.
The authors have said they have grounds to suspect possible war crimes may have been committed, a point picked up by the Greens co-leader Materia Tude.
Is the Prime Minister not taking seriously the possibility that the International Criminal Court could investigate the New Zealand Defence Force for the alleged killing of civilians, including children, in Afghanistan and a possible government cover-up?
Well, Mr Speaker, that's, maybe, who knows whether that's technically possible or not. Our concern is in the first instance to ensure that New Zealand Defence personnel have acted to and behaved to the standards that we would expect of them.
The Defence Minister at the time of the raids, Wayne Mapp, has refused to be interviewed about the allegations. When asked in 2011 whether there had been any civilian deaths, he said that had been investigated and he was satisfied there had been none. When approached today, Dr Mapp said he had not read the book and it should be the government that responds to it. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
So, if the Ihaka book is rejected by the government and the New Zealand Defence Force too, which of its assertions are wrong in fact? Where are the reports and investigations stating no civilians were killed? Who carried them out, and how confident are they of their own exactitude? We asked the Prime Minister, the Defence Minister, the previous Defence Minister Wayne Mapp, the then Chief of Defence Force Sajeri Mateparae, or any member of the Defence Force to join us on Checkpoint tonight. None were available. We did manage to speak to Major General Rhys Jones, Lieutenant General Rhys Jones, while he was Chief of Army at the time. He didn't replace Sajeri Mateparae as Chief of Defence Force until sometime after the raid. He was not in the command stream when the raid occurred. Still, is he confident the reports he subsequently received stating no civilian deaths are indeed correct?
I'm pretty confident that the official report about the SAS landing, about them doing an attack on the building where the bomb-making team or the attack team had been located. There was a firefight and the insurgents withdrew out of the way. We're pretty confident that there were no civilian casualties. There were, of course, the immediate claims by the insurgents that there were civilians killed. As I understand, the Afghan government and the ISAF followed up that claim. They visited a hospital in the local area where there were reports of the civilian casualties, and they only found a couple of fighting-age males with gunshot wounds.
No civilian deaths. That's what Major General Rhys Jones had been told. And that's what the Defence Force said publicly on April 20, 2011, 8 months after the raid, when a media statement said, and I quote, "Allegations of civilian casualties were unfounded." How thoroughly was this examined? Who examined it? Who did the investigation?
That was done by ISAF as a headquarters, because they were the ones responsible for that, alongside the Afghan local authorities, who investigated all claims of civilian casualties.
So, no New Zealand investigation on the ground, and the lead investigating party was ISAF, the International Security Assistance Force, whose own service members had participated in the raid, as explicitly stated by ISAF itself in a media release the day after the raid occurred. But there was another version of events published in the New York Times the following day, August 24th. It said, and I quote, "A nighttime raid by NATO commandos had left 8 civilians dead." Now, their source was the region's governor, who told the New York Times' reporter in Kabul the dead included a child. And the Ihaka Stokes book makes the same claim. But It says 6 civilian dead, and the New York Times said 8, while ISAF and the New Zealand Defence Force, both participants, had said none. Now, the raid itself is not in dispute. The NZDF says it happened. The dispute is over civilian deaths. How many were there? 8, 6 or 0? What happened on the ground? And was it exactly the same as people in Wellington, 13,000 kilometres away, were told?
As far as I'm aware, the official report is accurate. I have no reason to believe that there was any cover-up of information from that report.
Remember, the report came from ISAF, and the only ISAF and New Zealand Defence Force personnel who were there were participants. But you are absolutely confident, to the best of your knowledge, that there were no civilian casualties and that it was insurgents who were targeted and insurgents who were killed.
Yes, but I do put that claim to my knowledge. So one of the realities of the circumstances, because we couldn't stay around the area to do a 100% check, there may be things that we were not aware of. But that I'm confident that it was an insurgent base that we attacked, that it was a firefight with insurgents, and that civilian casualties did not occur. Now, the way in which they often operate, the insurgents operate, they do sit and camp or spend the night in the areas where there are civilians around as a kind of human shield. So, yeah, I mean, it is possible, but not to our knowledge.
That's Rhys Jones. I spoke to him. So he's saying it's possible. The Defence Force had previously entirely ruled out civilian casualties. Rhys Jones says not to his knowledge. We are now hearing reports from our own gallery team and from News Hub that Wayne Mapp, who was, of course, Defence Minister at the time and reportedly in the book signed off, or at least was informed of the operation being about to take place, has said, yes, there were civilian casualties. We're just trying to get exact clarity around the language he is using. Remember, of course, the book was only launched this time last night, as those of you who were listening to Checkpoint at the time will remember. We're trying to work out and find out exactly what Wayne Mapp is now saying. It's 5:17. Thank you for being with us. We're going to change the subject for the time being and go to the story of long-term mental health patient Ashley Peacock, who has spent much of the past decade in a 10-metre room inside a secure psychiatric unit, but who will be released into the community care by the end of this year. The Capital and Coast District Health Board confirmed Ashley, who has complex health needs, will be moved to a private home in a quiet rural area where he will continue to receive extensive around-the-clock care, but far greater freedom of movement. The 39-year-old's parents, Marlena and David, today made an emotional plea to the Health Select Committee, asking for it to monitor their son's transition. A short time ago, I spoke with them both and asked them where Ashley was going to go to ensure he gets the care he needs and deserves.
The site of where he's going to go is not known yet. I mean, this is all going to take at least 6 months because a house or cottage has to be found in a quiet environment in the country, and some extra staff need to be trained up. So all this takes probably at least 6 months from now. We're living up here on the Kapiti Coast, and he could be anywhere from between Pororua and Peka really, and so we don't know where exactly it'll be.
And you are living there, even though your home is in Gisborne, because you want to be near Ashley, who has effectively been in seclusion with, 90 minutes a day on a good day that he's allowed outside?
It's about 90 minutes a day, and he has an allocated van ride once a fortnight.
He's not actually in seclusion per se. He was, of course, for many years, but the last couple of years or so, he's still in the same room, but he's not locked, not locked in there.
He spends most of his time in what they call the seclusion de-escalation unit.
Yes.
So depending on how you define it, from the Ombudsman, they consider it still to be seclusion, but there's a whole lot of semantics around it.
And the reality, let's set aside the semantics and the description. What has been the reality of his life as you, his mum and dad, have observed it?
It's shocking. It's actually very depressing. He's such a outdoors guy, loves surfing, trout fishing, what's the other thing? Animals. And here he is in this very, very restrictive environment. And it's very, very punishing for him, and it's punishing for us to see the effects of that environment.
He also has sensory processing difficulties, so he gets overwhelmed by too much going on. And of course, being in that environment, there's often noisy people also there.
Yes.
So even though he's not locked in there, I mean, there can be somebody screaming in the next door cell.
Sometimes 24 hours a day.
Yeah. So it's not a lovely place to be in at all. And he still has to be in there for another 6 months or so yet. They are getting him out a lot more in the last year or two. The staff are doing what they can to ease the situation, but it's very difficult for them, and because the facilities are just not suitable.
No, and many people have said that, including people in high places. And this is a tough question for me to ask, but can I put it as politely as possible when I say none of us are getting any younger, right? And you worried that, that your ability to lobby for Ashley, to care for him, to keep tenaciously pursuing the best possible outcome for him was compromised by advancing years. So this is, at last, great news for his mum and dad, you two, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It couldn't have come any later. I mean, in a way, because we're both pretty advanced in age, as you put it so nicely, and we're not getting any younger. And it wasn't in my retirement plan to be doing this at all.
No.
So I've had to carry on working, for 10 years now. So after I could have retired. We just can't carry on.
No.
And we don't want to carry on this way. We want him to be able to be managed without us being around all the time.
It is a deep concern. I've had quite a lot of sleepless nights over what happens when we go if his situation isn't acceptable. It's a great worry, and I've spent quite a lot of time just wondering what would happen to him.
And every parent listening will know exactly what you're talking about, right? There's nothing that keeps you awake at night more than worrying about the welfare of your children. But do you think possibly you might be able to get a little bit more sleep now? Is this the light at the end of the tunnel actually becoming meaningful?
Well, at the moment, to be honest, we're shell-shocked. We've had so many disappointments that it's really, really hard to accept that this could actually be happening.
But I must say I've been feeling more easy about it and much more relaxed than I was sort of last year. Last year was sort of like hell on wheels. But the worst years were between 2010 and 2013 when he was virtually in there the whole time, in actual seclusion. I mean, that was just horrible.
That's David and Marlena Peacock talking about their son Ashley, who is going to have a change in circumstance, a new place to live, completely different for Ashley. His mum and dad haven't told him that yet because he doesn't really understand time, so he will expect if they tell him that he's going to move somewhere that he's moving tomorrow. We've just heard from the DHB and they say, look, we really want to clarify the extent to which Ashley was in seclusion, particularly in recent years. There was a real reduction in the amount of time that he was actually locked in a room, and they are really adamant that in fact he had far greater freedom than has been implied. Zach Fleming is going to be talking to the DHB later in Checkpoint, and we will be looking at this story a bit later on. It's 24 minutes past 5. Coming up on the program, should schools charge parents an application fee for school enrolments? And an Auckland man explains why he uploaded a disturbing video to Facebook showing his sister writhing and groaning in a chair after allegedly taking synthetic drugs. We'd love to hear from you in any way you choose. You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, email address checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Don't forget you can watch us on Facebook Live, Freeview Channel 50, or of course the RNZ website. any of the people who have avoided us today or just not been available to us today from the Defence Force who may want to join us, you do have our number and would love to talk to you about Nicky Haga's and John Stevenson's book. Parents are increasingly finding themselves being asked to pay just to apply to enrol their children at school. Secondary principals say the annual enrolment process is becoming more expensive for popular schools that have to double check that people who say they live in their school zone really do. Currently, schools are not allowed to charge for enrolments. That's an enrolment fee, though our education correspondent John Gerritsen has found one that does, and several others that ask for donations of up to $100. He filed this report.
Most schools don't ask parents to pay simply to enrol their child. One that does is Waikato Diocesan School for Girls, which has a $40 administration charge for enrolment applications. Education Ministry guidelines indicate that's not allowed. They say schools cannot charge a fee for enrolment interviews or applications. But the president of the Secondary Principals Association, Sandy Pasley, says it's not cheap to run schools' annual enrolment process.
They can be a really expensive business, particularly for those schools that have enrolment schemes, because there's a lot of checking that has to go on that people are actually eligible to apply for enrolment within a certain enrolment criteria. And that's not an easy exercise to do, and it's not a cheap exercise to do.
Sandy Pasley says enrolments have become more expensive and schools should be able to cover their costs.
Schools need to get some recompense for the expense that's been created. And whether it's a charge, I know there's some talk of schools certainly asking for a donation, but certainly they're out of pocket and something needs to happen to help those schools.
The ministry says schools can ask for a donation as long as it's clearly voluntary, and some schools do that. Sacred Heart and St Peter's colleges in Auckland ask for $100 to cover enrolment costs, while Auckland Grammar requests $50. The headmaster at Auckland Grammar, Tim O'Connor, says about 80% of families pay the donation, but it covers only a small proportion of the school's enrolment costs.
The calculations we've done is the $50 donation that we receive covers about 30% of our costs, overall staffing costs.
That's staffing costs to run the enrolment process?
Just to run the enrolment process, yeah.
The ministry says schools can't ask for donations for out-of-zone applications because it has the same effect as a compulsory fee. The principal of Cornwall District School in Auckland, Janine Irvine, says without a financial contribution, out-of-zone places can be more trouble than they're worth.
You could get potentially quite a large number of applications, and of course that's going to impact on the amount of hours that your administration staff have to deal with them. And so I suppose our Board of Trustees always weighs that up to see whether it's actually viable to offer out-of-zone places.
Despite the ministry's advice, Mount Albert Grammar and Auckland Grammar do ask out-of-zone applicants for a donation, and they say the Auditor-General has approved their practice. For Checkpoint, John Gerritsen.
A young Auckland man who posted a fairly shocking Facebook video of his sister writhing and vomiting after reportedly taking synthetic drugs says he's sick of seeing what they're doing to young people. The video has been viewed more than 1 million times in just 24 hours. Viewers say it's like watching someone possessed, but one drug rehab group says it's not the way to stop young people taking drugs. Sharon Brett Kelly reports. And a warning, the sounds from this video may be disturbing to some people.
Hey, you all right?
That is the voice of a man who calls himself Tuakeo Te Māori boy.
Look at you.
He's filming his sister in a zombie-like state, her face distorted. She groans as she writhes in her chair. The 98-second video then shows her reaching out to a young man bent back over his chair, mouth wide open, groaning. The man who posted it says it is a warning to whānau of what synthetic drugs, commonly called bath salts, and synthetic cannabis or spice can do. Viewers said they were sickened and saddened by seeing the effects of an evil drug. Here's how people in West Auckland reacted.
Whoa. How old are those children? They're only young too. That's beyond recognition. She just looks unwell. Mentally, physically.
Seeing that guy like zombified, head back, that's disgusting. Yeah, not into that.
They don't look like they know what's going on around them, and I wouldn't want to be in that sort of state where I'm not aware of my surroundings or what's going on.
It's just ugly being like that, so no way in hell I'd smoke that.
Tuakeo, Te Māori boy, would not be interviewed, but said in a text he had talked to his sister afterwards to try to snap her out of it. I told her to take her partner and herself to the shower, he said, but she was too off her face. So he carried them to the shower and told them to clean themselves up.
I think what we're seeing in that video is a combination of all the worst that could happen, unknown drugs, mixing it with alcohol, and potentially being in a very dangerous situation.
That's the head of the Drug Foundation, Ross Bell. He says bath salts describes a range of white, crystal-like synthetic substances that are easily bought illegally, often through the dark net.
Some of them aren't problematic and some of them are really dangerous. In fact, we've had a death in New Zealand from one of the substances within that broad family. So we do know that it's on the market and we do know that they're causing real problems, and the issue we have is that users don't know what they're taking.
The drug gives the user a surge of energy and speeds up the heart rate before paranoia, hallucination, nausea and vomiting hit. Ross Bell says the problem can't be fixed with traditional law enforcement. Users need better information about the dangers. One Facebook user says the video should be shown in every school, but a drug rehabilitation centre says scare tactics don't stop people trying drugs. Ben Burks-Ang is the National Youth Service Advisor for Odyssey House.
The danger of having this scary videos and hard-hitting type approaches is that for people who are going through experimenting with substances, they can actually see it as, well, nothing's happened to me, I haven't had any harm, I'm not this bad, and it can delay them seeking help from it. And for people who aren't using, it kind of reinforces their decision not to use.
Ben Burks-Ang says synthetic substances are not commonly used. Alcohol and cannabis are still the most popular drugs for young people. And in a post today, Tuakeo, Te Māori boy, says his sister is sober and wanting to change after she saw the video. I Tamaki Makaurau mō te hotaka o te ahi ko Sharon Brett Kelly aho.
Coming up on Checkpoint, more on this developing hit and run. Nicky Hager, John Stevenson's story. John Key's valedictory speech is about to take place. We will go to Parliament Live. Chaotic scenes at the New Zealand Petroleum Conference, and she's hired. Ivanka Trump gets her own West Wing office, security clearance, all the classified information, you name it. Nona's got business next, but first Katrina with headlines.
The Prime Minister says a report that found there were no civilian casualties in raids by New Zealand troops in Afghanistan may not be publicly available. The Defence Force says an investigation by the Afghan government and International Security Assistance Force at the time found claims of civilian deaths were unfounded. But Bill English says New Zealand authorities may not be able to access that report because of jurisdiction issues. South Korean defence officials say a North Korean missile launch has failed. It's not yet clear how many missiles were fired or what type they were. Earlier this month, the North fired 4 missiles that flew about 1,000 kilometres, landing in Japanese waters. A former Fisher & Paykel healthcare employee has admitted corruption charges involving payments totalling $213,000 for distribution deals. At the Auckland District Court today, Simon William Hall admitted 1 charge of obtaining by deception and 2 charges under Section 8 of the Secret Commissions Act. The offending happened while Hall was an area manager in Auckland and during dealings with 2 companies in Saudi Arabia and Jordan. A man at the centre of a house siege near Kawerau last year has told a court he feared for his life when armed police stormed in. Rhys Warren's on trial at the High Court in Hamilton on charges including 2 of attempted murder after 4 police officers were wounded. Mr Warren said he thought his life was being threatened when armed officers entered his house. He said he fired at police but never intended for anyone to get hurt. The Court of Appeal has ordered a trust to repay nearly $16 million to the Invercargill City Council over the collapse of a roof at Stadium Southland. The roof collapsed under the weight of snow in September 2010. In 2015, the High Court found the council liable for the cost of repairs, but the Court of Appeal didn't agree. It says the trust that operated the stadium failed to act on an engineer's advice that the roof might have a structural problem. Those are the headlines. I'll be back at 6.
Thank you very much, Katrina. Nona next, but first an interview that Nona did. It's steady as she goes for Fonterra after the dairy cooperative lifted its profits thanks to better returns for high-value products like infant milk and pizza toppings, I guess that's cheese, and lower debt costs. The country's biggest company made $418 million in the 6 months to the end of Jan, 2% higher than the same period last year. Now, volatile prices and fluctuating milk production has seen Fonterra lower its dividend estimate slightly to between 45 and 55 cents, but the company's confident that it can maintain its forecast milk payout of $6 a kilo of milk solids. The chief executive of Fonterra, Tao Spearings, told our business reporter, Nona Peltier, it would be premature to assume the second half year will be weaker than the first.
When prices are moving up, milk prices to about $6.50, our organization should be really connected to market and customers, that we're pricing right early, or up front, that we don't feel the margin pressure like we felt it in the past. And I think this result is a very good example of we've delivered more net profit, but the milk price is 54% higher.
Do you think that the market should prepare itself for potentially a weaker second half than has been seen in past times?
No, I think what the market should just read is our guidance, and our guidance is clear that we're saying we anticipate a cash payout of $6.40, $6 milk price, 40 cents of dividends, 40 cents of dividends, same as last year. So on the back of 54% higher milk price, we deliver a similar result. That's the best information we have right now on market guidance. So,
your China business generally, your China farms is still making a loss. I know you're looking for a break even, but overall, some of the investments you've made in China, are they paying off for you? Or are you changing your strategy there?
China is really an integrated strategy. We have a very big ingredient business. We have an everyday nutrition business, a very strong food service business, growing extremely fast. Yeah, and we are running a big profit, but we have invested in certain brands. We keep on investing at a negative cash flow. Farms, we are getting to a break-even situation at the back end of this year. 2 reasons. Operational cost down year on year for the second year in a row, and we are going to use that milk for our branded business. So China Farms is absolutely crucial in our total strategy, and the Being Made investment is a long-term investment. We have never invested for share price. We have invested for dividend, and we have invested for other commercial arrangements. So when you look at the total partnership, there's quite a few ticks, but when you look at the performance of the listed company in China, then there's pressure. But all infant nutrition players in China who are there to stay are under pressure at the moment.
And then just talking about the future, your future in particular, how committed are you to Fonterra? And looking ahead for Fonterra, where do you see the business in 5 years, given the disruption that you're looking at?
I'm very committed, you know that. I love New Zealand and I love this company, so... but yeah, you're right. The strategy we have written 5 years ago, and we are delivering now 24 months in a row on huge volatility. We're delivering consistent results. But the world is changing very fast, not only geopolitically, but also from a technology perspective and communication perspective, and many changes, but there's many opportunities there. So right now we're going through a strategic planning cycle, and I see a whole lot of massive opportunities coming at us in the coming 5 years. And we have a great organization, great people, so I'm very confident.
Tao Spearings talking to Nona, who's sitting beside me, Nona.
Right. Okay.
So one thing.
Yep.
From time to time there are rumours he's off. I don't know why he'd be off when you were earning the salary that he's earning, but he's very clear about his commitment both to the country and to the organisation. He was explicitly saying he's staying.
And he was surprised by the question, by the way, after the interview. He said to me, "Why did you ask me that? Do people think I'm going to leave?"
Right.
You know, so
yeah. Okay.
no, I didn't get the sense from him that that's, if there is a rumor, it's that. That's all it is. Okay, so the Fonterra Fund share price, it fell 4 cents to $6.18 following this morning's result. The cooperative share, those are the farmers' share price, that was down 3 cents to $6.19.
Okay. So that is New Zealand's biggest company, a couple of other biggies trying desperately to overcome a Commerce Commission opposition to a merger, really.
Well, so on the upside, Sky share price rose 6% to...
Sky and Vodafone?
Sky City, Sky Television, rather. Rose 6% to by 21 cents to $3.69. And that was because, we can assume it's because they decided to appeal the Commerce Commission decision, which said no to its proposed merger with Vodafone. So they've filed an appeal in the High Court, and we'll have to watch that space. So overall, the New Zealand top 50 index fell a third, but then, Asia's a bit weaker as well. A third of a percent by 25 points to 7,061. Our dollar is mixed. It's just like steady as you go against the US dollar at 70.3 US cents. Stronger against the Australian, 91.8, but down against the British pence at 56.4.
Nona Peltier, who gives us the markets, talks to Taya Spearing and is jolly good company every night in here at 5:30. Thanks, Nona. John Key's valedictory coming up. But before all of that, the trial of a man accused of killing a 15-month-old boy has heard how the child screamed for his mother when Troy Taylor tried to pick him up just 2 days before his death. This evidence given in the court today. Troy Taylor, who was considered to be Ihaka Stokes' stepfather, is accused at the High Court in Christchurch of assaulting and murdering him at their home in 2015. Conan Young is covering the trial.
Yeah, look, we heard this evidence today from an Annette Johnson. She was the head of the nursery that Ihaka Stokes was in. She said when Troy picked him up that Ihaka struggled and cried out for his mother and wouldn't settle until his mother actually came into the room and took him off Troy. Now, the preschool teacher said she described this as significant. She said this was the first time in all of the many times she'd seen Troy Taylor pick up Ihaka Stokes that Ihaka Stokes had acted in this way, and it really stood out to her. Now, look, this evidence is crucial because this happened on the Wednesday. This was just 2 days before Ihaka Stokes actually died, as the Crown alleges, at the hands of his stepfather. And so obviously crucial in terms of this case because the Crown is saying it was Troy Taylor who, in their words, snapped and assaulted this child, leading to his death. The defence case is that it was actually his mother, Michaela Stokes, who assaulted this child and caused those injuries. So, just how Ihaka Stokes was reacting, behaving around both of his parents in those couple of days just before is crucial to this case. As well as Annette Johnson, today we heard from a number of other preschool teachers who help look after this boy 3 days a week at this preschool. They described him as being a really happy boy, really social. He was just learning to walk, was crawling around the place. They actually described him as being a really good sleeper. In fact, they said that when he woke up in the nursery, they'd have to quickly get him out of there because he woke up in such a good mood that he'd sort of disrupt the other children. Really some real insights in there to what sort of child he was.
The jury today heard, Conan, from one of the nurses helping to care for Ihaka when he was brought into the hospital, right? And I suspect this was pretty harrowing evidence, was it? What did she say?
Yeah, no, it really was. This is the nurse who was there in Ihaka Stokes' final moments in hospital. She said, when they medical staff realised that there wasn't much hope for him, they allowed Michaela Stokes into the room where he was being worked on. When the doctor called his death and they stopped trying to give CPR, she said that Michaela Stokes just cried and in her words melted. The nurse was one of two who helped clean up Ihaka Stokes and wrap him up and hand him to his mother. She said that both Michaela Stokes' family and Troy Taylor's family were at the hospital and were offering a lot of support. And she said they were both groups of families were worried and concerned that Troy Taylor wasn't there at the time. We heard today that he was being interviewed at the police station by detectives. Another really hard day of evidence today. Just sitting in the public gallery was Michaela Stokes, this boy's mother. She was supported by both her parents. On the other side, Troy Taylor's family was sitting there offering support to him. These two, Michaela Stokes and Troy Taylor, aren't together anymore, and this case is really coming down to which side do you believe. We're going to hear later from Troy Taylor. He's going to give evidence in his own defence, so we'll see what he has to say then.
Connie Young from Christchurch. John Key's valedictory in a moment. The risk of miniaturised explosives being planted in electronic gadgets rather than any specific plot appears to be behind a cabin luggage ban on laptops and tablets on some flights. The BBC's security correspondent Frank Gardner reports on this from London.
Familiar, tedious, time-consuming. Getting laptops and other electrical devices through airport security on certain direct flights from the Middle East to the UK is about to get even more complicated. Anything bigger than a smartphone will now have to go in the hold, creating new opportunities for thieves. British Airways, EasyJet and 4 other UK airlines are affected. So too are 8 Middle Eastern and North African carriers. It follows a similar measure introduced by the United States, which shares its intelligence with Britain. So what exactly has prompted this?
Elevated intelligence that we're aware of indicates that terrorist groups continue to target commercial aviation and are aggressive in pursuing innovative methods to undertake their attacks, to include smuggling of explosive devices and various consumer objects.
There is some recent evidence of bombs getting onto planes. This aircraft had a hole blown in its side over Somalia last year when an al-Shabaab militant smuggled an explosive laptop on board. He was killed, but miraculously everyone else survived. The passengers on this Russian airliner in 2015 were not so fortunate. It came down over the Egyptian Sinai, killing everyone on board, after so-called Islamic State had placed a bomb in the hold. The very place travellers are being told they'll now have to stow their laptops. Behind closed doors in Whitehall, there's been intensive discussion over just how far-reaching to make this ban. Security officials believe the ongoing threat from jihadists to aviation is real. But there'll be a price to pay for this, both commercially and diplomatically. The countries affected are Western allies. All this comes on the back of President Trump's highly controversial ban on travellers from Muslim-majority countries. Now, this latest measure will be viewed by many around the world as discriminatory and even anti-Islamic, possibly widening divisions in society. Business travellers deprived of their laptops, families deprived of their gaming tablets. The government knows this ban is not going to be popular, and there's no end date in sight. The ban on carrying liquids over 100 mils, introduced 11 years ago, is still in place.
That report from the BBC. We're going to cross live to Parliament now, where John Key, who was Prime Minister, of course, for 8 years, is making his valedictory speech. We're just going to switch the audio up.
I'd hate to think how many three-way handshake selfies I've done, but they sure made week go quickly. The ASEAN summit features a rather odd cross-handed handshake known as the ASEAN Way. I remember on one occasion, after a photo in front of the world's media, the then Philippines leader, President Aquino, leaning over to me and saying, "John, if that's the ASEAN way, I'd hate to see what the other way looks like." I felt like replying, "Ring Richie McCaw." Getting to go to some of the most iconic places in the world as Prime Minister has left memories I'll never forget. And getting to share them with Brona, Steffi and Max made them even more special. From Balmoral to Chequers, we saw it all. I never forget taking the kids when they were quite young to China. The last time I'd been there was as a businessman, so when I went back as Prime Minister, I asked if over the weekend I might go to a couple of places to allow the kids to see some of the most famous sites like Tiananmen Square and the Great Wall. Our Chinese hosts kindly agreed. As we were approaching both sites, I said to Max, "Best to stay close or maybe even hold my hand, because there'll be more people around you than you've ever seen in your entire life." When we arrived, Max looked out of the car window, looked at me and said, "Where is everyone?" I took one look and realised the entire Tiananmen Square had been emptied in the middle of the day so my kids could get to see it. And when we arrived on the wall, we were the only people on it for 5 miles in each direction. You sure get some cool photos when you're Prime Minister. One time I was at the Pacific Forum in the Marshall Islands, and when the summit finished we had some downtime before leaving, so I hatched a plan to go tuna fishing. The trouble was I was due to get an important phone call from the then British Prime Minister, my friend David Cameron, about the atrocities taking place in Libya to talk about why Britain was taking military action. No worries, someone said, we have the satellite phone. So we headed out to sea, and just as I had hooked a big one and were hauling it on board, the phone rang. I handed the rod to my diplomatic protection officer, who found some implement to finish off the tuna, which was flapping mightily in the boat. Fair to say there was a huge amount of noise in the background, and Cameron, who was used to taking calls in secure phones and in quiet office, said to me, "What the hell is going on there?" "Oh," I said, "don't be alarmed, it's just that we're on a fishing boat about a mile out to sea in the Marshall Islands and I've landed a big tuna." There was this long silence, and then he wistfully said, "God, I wish I ran a small country." One of the unexpected parts of government was dealing with tragedy and disaster. When the first Canterbury earthquake happened, I just landed in Christchurch to see the damage for myself when I received a text from the department informing me that a skydiving plane had crashed at Fox Glacier, killing all 9 people on board. That tragic and sudden loss of life put in perspective the terrible damage I was seeing around me in Christchurch. Bad as the earthquake had been, at least it had not claimed any lives. That all changed on the afternoon of February the 22nd, 2011. We felt that quake so strongly in the beehive that we thought it must have been centred near us. But moments later, my Chief of Staff, Wayne Eagleson, came in and said, "That wasn't Wellington, that was Christchurch." I arrived in Latimer Square to the sound of sirens blaring and the air full of smoke from the burning CTV building. The media were reporting 12 dead, but the police commander told me that the number was 65 and rising. "How sure are you?" I asked him. "Very sure," he said. "We've counted at least 65 body bags, and they're only the ones that we've managed to get to so far." The Christchurch earthquakes really hit home to me. It was my hometown, and the death toll was so high. Right then, New Zealand seemed a particularly vulnerable and fragile place. Time and again, we've seen the answer to nature's devastation as people's resolve. Standing behind Christchurch was hugely important for my government, and indeed for this Parliament as a whole. Jerry Brownlee deserves a lot of credit for dealing with the situation that was without precedent. It was Jerry who knew we had to establish a red zone, buy the 10,000 homes we did, support the small businesses and pass the SERA legislation. In my view, Christchurch and New Zealand owe Jerry a huge debt of gratitude for putting in place the mechanisms that allowed New Zealand to literally save a city. I'll also never forget the Pike River mine disaster. As the full gravity of the situation became clear, I flew to Greymouth. The impact that event had and continues to have on the small community of the West Coast is profound. It also had a far-reaching impact on New Zealand's workplace health and safety laws. No one should leave home to go to work and never return. One thing that maybe isn't well known is that 5 days after the initial explosion, the Mines Rescue Trust had decided it was safe to re-enter the mine. That Wednesday, I was receiving regular briefings on the planned re-entry, so when the phone rang, I thought it was to inform me they'd gone in. Instead, I learned that a massive explosion had occurred. Had those rescuers been in the mine, they too would have perished. Let me say to those families directly affected by the disaster, I sincerely wish you could have been provided with the closure you deserve, but I can honestly say I never in my time as Prime Minister saw a credible and safe plan to achieve that. A responsible country must sometimes stand alongside others to try and create a less violent and more stable world, but the risks and costs can be high. As Prime Minister, I was ultimately responsible for committing New Zealand troops overseas. The burden of doing so weighs heavily on any leader, and no news grieved me more than the loss of our troops in the course of duty which happened in my time. My heart continues to go out to Defence families for their sacrifice, and on this, my final day in this House, I want to again salute the bravery and commitment of those who have died serving their country and our national interests. New Zealanders can be rightfully proud of the men and women of our armed services. They are professional, dedicated and highly regarded around the world. In my time as Prime Minister, I had quite a lot to do with them, and in particular I want to thank the Air Force personnel who flew and supported the 757s, the King Airs, the Hercules and the helicopters that took me safely around New Zealand and the world. In particular, I want to thank the crew that landed the 757 in Sao Paulo, Brazil, in the worst electrical storm I've ever seen. I owe you a beer. The truth is my confidence in the Air Force and the SAS grew so much that late last year I decided to tag along an SAS training day to do a parachute jump from Whenuapai in my electorate. Needless to say, my office was a touch nervous about the jump, and the kitchen cabinet didn't find out until the day before. Anyway, I jumped from 12,000 feet, and sometime after 7 a.m. when I was on the ground again, I rang Brona, buzzing with excitement to declare I was alive and well. I then texted Bill English. I kept it short. I'm alive, I said. His reply was even shorter. Bugger. One minute later, I got another text from him. Going to give it another go? It was at that point I decided he was just a little bit more ambitious than he was letting on.
John Key making his valedictory speech live in Parliament. The time on Checkpoint is coming up to 5 to 6. There were chaotic scenes at the New Zealand Petroleum Conference in New Plymouth today when the police forcibly moved protesters blocking entrances to the venue. Our Taranaki reporter Robin Martin was there.
The protesters barricaded the entrances at about 7:30, and just before 9 the police warned that they would be trespassed if they didn't make way. Soon after, the police moved in. Many of the conference's 450 delegates had been forced to sneak through shops and down alleyways, and only about 2/3 of them had made it into the venue. Protest organiser Emily Bailey says fears about climate change brought protesters out onto the street despite the persistent rain.
Climate change has started. We've seen the worst growing season here in maybe 30 years in Taranaki. Floods, droughts, wildfires. Our Pacific Island neighbours are being drowned by countries like this who are not prepared to take the necessary steps to get off fossil fuels.
Ms Bailey says the oil and gas industry is delaying the transition to renewable energy to maximise its profits. Greenpeace campaigner Steve Abel directed his message at delegates waiting to enter the conference venue.
As you know, the science of climate change means that if we are to have a future, oil and gas needs to not have a future. So we strongly encourage you, for the good of all of us, including your own children and grandchildren, to get out of this industry that is literally killing the planet. That's why we're here to say.
The principal scientist paleontology at GNS Science, Christopher Hollis, was one of the few delegates willing to speak to media. Mr Hollis says many people in the petroleum sector share the protesters' concerns and are looking for solutions.
We recognise that we have to stop pumping oil into the atmosphere. Emissions are the problem, right? It's not people use oil and gas very efficiently, and many of us here are working harder to find ways that don't damage the planet. So we're all on the same side, really.
Cameron Madwick is Chief Executive of conference organisers, the Petroleum Exploration and Production Association. Mr Madwick says Pepins had anticipated some sort of protest, but it was still upsetting to delegates.
It's disappointing that the protesters chose to blockade the venue and disrupted some of our delegates getting inside. We've asked the protesters that they respect the rights of our delegates to attend, just as we're respecting the rights of the protesters to convey their messages.
Mr Madwick says a highlight of today's conference was the Minister of Energy and Resources, Judith Collins, address to delegates.
Both displaying her government's ongoing commitment to the industry and also launching the 2017 block offer permitting round. That was met with, I think, some quite excitement in the room. A number of the companies who are looking to invest here will be heartened by what has been made available through the block offer.
Only 2 people have been arrested so far, but that could increase tonight with protesters promising to create a wall of sound at the conference dinner. Tomorrow the activists are running a parallel event focused on alternatives to petroleum, while the conference proper continues at the TSB showplace. In New Plymouth for Checkpoint, ko Robin Martin Tēnei.
It's coming up to 2 minutes to 6. It does appear that Warren Mapp, the former Defence Minister, is now saying there were civilian casualty. Wayne Mapp, the former Defence Minister, is now saying there were civilian casualties, civilian deaths as a result of that SAS-led operation in Afghanistan. Jane Patterson, our political editor, is going to join us after 6 o'clock. I just want to read from the Defence Force statement, 20 April 2011, New Zealand Defence Force operations in Bamiyan province on 22nd of August 2010. This is the raid that Nikki Ihaka and John Stevenson's book Hit and Run is about. Now, it's a long statement and it goes on. The operation was conducted as part of a wider ISAF mission. ISAF, of course, is effectively NATO in Afghanistan, with the local Afghan forces thrown in. 9 insurgents were killed in the operation. It then goes on and responds to some allegations that were beginning to surface at that time that civilians were killed. It says the investigation concluded that the allegations of civilian casualties were unfounded. Now, that was the last real official statement on this, and when the book came out last night, it was dismissed unequivocally. There were lots of people saying there were no civilian casualties, and Nikki Ihaka and John Stevenson have it wrong. We are now hearing, in fact, that they may indeed have had it right. How right? We will try and ascertain from Jane Patterson, our political editor, after the news at 6. And people saying an application fee for enrolment, they have to be taking the mickey. Thank you for being with us.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. The former Defence Minister, Wayne Mapp, has not denied a comment he made, as quoted in the new book Hit and Run, about the 2010 raid on 2 Afghan villages being a disastrous operation and a fiasco. Dr Mapp was Defence Minister at the time of the raids, at the centre of the book, which alleges the SAS organised and led raids in Afghanistan in which 6 people died and 15 were injured. Dr Mapp has told News Hub that one of the disasters of war is that terrible things can happen. He says both he and the former Prime Minister, John Key, who the book alleges signed off the raid, acted on proper advice. He says the operation did not achieve its objective, which was to capture the group of targeted insurgents. The former Chief of Defence Force says he's pretty confident there were no civilian casualties in the raids. Lieutenant General Rhys Jones was in the position from 2011 to 2014. General Jones told Checkpoint the claims of casualties were investigated at the time, and as far as he's aware, there was no cover-up.
One of the realities of the circumstances, because we couldn't stay around the area to do a 100% check, there may be things that we were not aware of, but that I'm confident that it was an insurgent base that we attacked and that civilian casualties did not occur.
Lieutenant General Rhys Jones. The parents of mental health patient Ashley Peacock are relieved he'll be released into the community by the end of this year. Mr Peacock is autistic with high and complex health needs and isn't in a secure unit run by the Capital and Coast District Health Board in Porirua. His parents, David and Marlene Peacock, told Checkpoint the DHB and Health Ministry have agreed to Ashley being relocated to a house in a quiet rural location.
We just can't carry on. And we don't want to carry on this way. We want him to be able to be managed without us being around all the time.
Yeah, it is a deep concern. I've had quite a lot of sleepless nights over what happens when we go if his situation isn't acceptable.
David and Marlene Peacock say it's the last chance for their son, who spent 17 years in inappropriate care, including long periods in seclusion. Ihaka Stokes' biological father has broken down while giving evidence in court today. Troy Taylor, who was considered to be Ihaka Stokes' stepfather, is accused at the High Court in Christchurch of assaulting and murdering the 15-month-old at their home in 2015. Today, his biological father, Cameron Allen, described overhearing Mr Taylor discussing how he heard a bump in the night and ran to the toddler's room to find him with a bloody mouth and lying unconscious in his cot. Mr Allen, who's been apart from his son for about 5 months before his death, broke down as he gave evidence. The Crown's case is the boy's mother, Michaela Stokes, slept while her son was being assaulted by Mr Taylor. Under questioning today, Mr Allen confirmed she was a very deep sleeper. The police say there's no evidence of criminal wrongdoing at a Southland special school. Ruru Specialist School was the first to have complaints laid against it for using a seclusion room. Here's our Otago Southland reporter Ian Telfer.
The complaints by a Ruru school parent more than 2 years ago sparked investigations by the Ministry of Education, police and ultimately the Chief Ombudsman. The police say they've now finished investigating allegations of assault and unlawful detention and found no evidence to support criminal charges. Ruru's staff didn't cooperate with the police. In a letter to parents today, the school's principal, Erin Cairns, says she's pleased at the outcome and reiterated that it never operated a seclusion room and has complied with all ministry guidelines. Ms Cairns says the school is fully cooperating with the Chief Ombudsman's inquiry. I Otapoti, ko Ian Telfer, tēnei.
The Postal Workers Union is outraged that New Zealand Post is making it more expensive to send letters when the service is getting worse. New Zealand Post says the price of a stamp on a medium-sized letter will rise 27% from $1.80 to $2.30 from July, and large and oversized letters will also increase by 50 cents. The union's Southern President, John Maynard, says the price increase should be scrapped and the state-owned enterprise should instead focus on getting letters sent on time.
Well, I'd like to see how they can justify such substantial increases in their mail when their service is steadily and deliberately eroding. And no wonder they'll say that people are using the mail system less, because from everybody's experience, the service is less.
John Maynard says people should be able to expect fast post to arrive the next day. It's 6:05. To sport, in England's hopes of playing the All Blacks this year have been dashed, according to a British media report. England rugby hierarchy have been trying to replace the All Blacks' scheduled match against the Barbarians at Twickenham in November with a match against the Six Nations champions. However, the Daily Mail is reporting that the New Zealand rugby chief executive has insisted to his England rugby counterpart Ian Ritchie that the Barbars match go ahead. The Kiwis forward Jason Taumalolo has signed one of the longest contract deals in National Rugby League history, keeping him at North Queensland until the end of the 2027 season. The NRL Player of the Year last season has signed a 10-year contract believed to be worth $11 million. Cowboys coach Paul Green says it was Taumalolo who proposed the 10-year deal and the club had to give it plenty of thought.
Took us by surprise also, but I think the upside clearly outweighs those risks, and all of the management of the club looked very closely at it. When we weighed it all up, we felt that the positives far outweighed the negatives.
Cowboys coach Paul Green. The former All Whites captain Tommy Smith says he's thankful to be back in the national side. The Ipswich Town player hasn't played for New Zealand since 2014 after falling out with coach Anthony Hudson, but has been recalled for the World Cup qualifiers against Fiji. Smith approached Hudson last year to resolve their differences and also spoke with senior All Whites players and was assured that there was no negativity over him returning. That's the news.
Afghan civilians killed, RSAS in the gun.
I have a lot of faith in our Defence Force. They have said that they've investigated, they've said that they were not involved in any deaths of civilians, and I would certainly take their word at that.
Military honour under question.
If I were Paula Bennett, I'd want to be very, very sure that I'm getting accurate and truthful information from the New Zealand Defence Force.
The next step.
Somebody could send this to the prosecutors at the International Criminal Court under Article 15.
Searching for answers. Morning Report with Guy and Espiner and Susie Ferguson, weekdays from 6.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland and Auckland, cloudy periods and the odd shower in Northland. Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Gisborne, mainly fine, areas of cloud morning and evening. Waikato, Waitomo and Taupo, mostly cloudy with patchy drizzle, becoming fine early tomorrow. Wairarapa and Hawke's Bay, cloud increasing with patchy drizzle developing towards evening. Taranaki to Wellington, including Taumaranui and Taihape, mostly cloudy with a few drizzle patches, clearing tomorrow morning. Nelson and Marlborough, excluding the Kaikoura coast, mainly fine with areas of high cloud, however isolated showers about the ranges. Kaikoura coast and Canterbury, cloudy with occasional drizzle, clearing tomorrow. Bulla and Westland, fine with high cloud. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, often cloudy with a few showers but long fine breaks inland, fine tomorrow. And the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with the odd shower, rain for a time this evening. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks so much, Katrina. Former Defence Minister Wayne Mapp has acknowledged that civilians were killed in a 2010 New Zealand SAS-led raid in Afghanistan, as detailed in a new book. The Prime Minister, Bill English, is resisting calls for an immediate inquiry into the claims by Nikki Hager and John Stevenson in their book Hit and Run that 21 civilians were wounded or killed. It was a 15-6 split, 6 killed. The Defence Force says at the time, the Defence Force at the time concluded the allegations were unfounded, and it's standing by those findings. The book says that Wayne Mapp, who was Defence Minister at the time of the raid, privately described it as a disaster and a fiasco. When asked by a News Hub reporter today if he stood by those comments, Mr Mapp had this to say.
Well, at the time the raid took place, the soldiers thought they were engaging insurgents. That's how the people were acting. That's what the report was at the time.
Do you have any remorse about what happened?
In 2014, I was informed that, I saw it on TV in fact, that a 3-year-old child got killed. I'm sure everyone was remorseful about that. But at the time of the attack, people thought they were actually being attacked by insurgents.
Okay, are you comfortable with the amount of information that you knew about this sort of thing whilst you were minister?
Yes, I made my business to be informed, and I know the procedures of Afghanistan and the Alliance headquarters in Afghanistan about investigating operations, and we accepted their investigations. They were the people on the ground able to undertake the investigations.
Okay, well, I suppose, what do you make of these allegations made by Nikki Hager?
Well, they have information, and yeah, the key point is at the time the operation took place, people thought they were under attack. That's why the firing took place.
Okay. Just going back to what I said at the start, did you say that the 2010 raid was quote one of the biggest and worst operations that have taken place?
Well, we didn't achieve the objectives we sought, which was the capture of a named group of people. They were in an area that was an area of known hostility. Right around that area where the New Zealand PRT was being attacked by rifles, machine guns, rockets and so forth, and it seemed to be emanating from that general area.
That's former Defence Minister Wayne Mapp talking to News Hub. The Defence Minister Gerry Brownlee and the Chief of Defence Force are on their way back from Iraq after an unpublicised trip there and have so far made no comment. Now, joining us now live on the phone is Hit and Run co-author John Stevenson, who wrote the book with Nikki Hager. John, are you there?
I am.
Hi. Were you listening to Wayne Mapp then?
I was.
Right. What do you make of all this? Because there has been a wall of denial in the past 24 hours, and Wayne Mapp seems not to be denying. What do you make of what he is saying?
It's incredible, isn't it? Within 24 hours of the book being launched, with very, very serious allegations, the former Defence Minister has essentially pulled the rug out from his organisation and said that there is substance to the allegations, which they have been denying for years. This is a very significant moment, and I take my hat off to Wayne Mapp. He's done the right thing.
If he's done the right thing, then are we to conclude from that that everything prior to this has been the wrong thing, and that the old adage, truth is the first casualty of war, is very true here? And if so, why? Where did the non-truth come from?
Let me be very clear about the chain of responsibility. The minister, the buck stops with the minister, but the minister, of course, isn't on the scene. He can only speak after receiving advice. He's dependent, reliant on what he is told, and I believe that the Defence Force did not tell him the whole truth, and that he inadvertently misled the public of New Zealand because he wasn't given an accurate and full briefing by his servants.
There's a real sense that people in Wellington didn't know what was going on. I spoke to Rhys Jones before, and he kept saying, I believe the reports, I rely on the reports. But as that conversation went on, he sounded less and less sure that the reports, in fact, were a full picture.
But isn't this astonishing that for years they've been denying this, categorically denying it, and now all that has been swept away in a matter of 24 hours by a Defence Minister, former Defence Minister, who I would suggest has been struggling for years with what happened.
Well, in fact, the book explicitly says that that you've spoken to people that he spoke to that say he was very uncomfortable about what happened.
True, correct.
So, is that correct? Did you speak to people, and you spoke to people, and I think you spoke to the person who heard him use the fiasco word?
I have to be careful, obviously, about sources, but let me say that I was 100% confident that the story would stand up. I had no doubt that what Wayne Mapp is reported as saying in the book was true, that he told an acquaintance that this was our biggest and most disastrous operation in Afghanistan, a fiasco, and that civilians had died.
Where to now? Because you know, the book only came out, 25 hours ago, almost to the minute. And it's moving so very fast. And I guess what we need now, setting aside the work that you and Ihaka have done in the book, is some official clarity and official consistency too. How do we get that?
I think this just emphasises the need for an inquiry, John. I mean, you can't have the Defence Force categorically stating that no civilians were killed and only insurgents were killed, and having your former Defence Minister stating that that is not the case. That's an untenable situation. It was untenable this morning when it was a case of Nikki and I relying on the accounts of villagers, accounts of the Afghan and New Zealand Special Forces who were on the operation, relying on the accounts of the United Nations, the Afghan Independent Human Rights Commission, the local government, the governor of the district who had issued the death certificates, all those people up against the Defence Force that just seemed to have its head in the sand. So I think there needs to be an inquiry now to establish what else in the book is correct. Don't forget there are very serious allegations, including that a prisoner, a blindfolded and flexi-tied prisoner in our custody was seriously beaten by a member of the SAS, and they transferred that man to the custody of the Afghan Intelligence Service, who were notorious for torture, and that man was tortured, and that we knew that he was tortured.
John,
those are very serious allegations.
We've got Jane Patterson, our political editor, standing by, but I do want to ask you one thing. Were some of your sources involved in the operation on the ground?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Multiple sources were there on the ground.
Okay, and they had a crisis of conscience, you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, John Stevenson, the co-author of the book Hit and Run that was only released 25 hours ago, with Ihaka joining us live. Let's go to our political editor, Jane Patterson. Jane, what are we to make of all this?
I think the interesting thing about Wayne Mapp's comments, John, in particular, is that this is independent corroboration of one of the facts in the book. So we talked initially about it being very difficult because it really does come down to a point of he says, she says, if we just, we have to take people at their word. So he was asked twice whether he made those comments. He certainly did not deny them. In terms of the comment about the civilian killed, I took it that he saw that on a television report. So
yes, that's what he seemed to be saying,
He was not made, and I suppose another thing I'd say is that we have not had a chance to go back to Dr. Mapp and clarify these comments. So I'm just going off the comments he made to News Hub. From that, I took it, he started off saying he was informed, and then he said, in fact, I saw it on television. So I don't think that he received that information in his capacity as a minister, but he certainly didn't seem to be surprised by that revelation, and then said, when asked about the Ihaka Stevenson book, he said, well, they had information, and then started to talk about the objective of the operation, the original objective, and he said the target of capturing the insurgents had not been done, and that's when he was referring back to the operation.
Absolutely, because the insurgents, according to the book, weren't even in the village during the time of the raid. One final question. The government now is going to find it very hard, aren't they, to resist an inquiry into this?
They are still seeking more information, is very much the feeling that I'm getting. Interestingly, Mr. English saying today that he didn't necessarily know whether New Zealand would be able to even access
the ISAF. Yeah.
So that is what the government and the Defence Force are relying on, and he said there may be jurisdictional issues. Of course, Jerry Brownlee, just coming out of Iraq, the Defence Minister, with the CDF, I imagine that Mr. English will want to have a discussion with him before they make any more moves. He was not ruling out an inquiry today. He said that the threshold would be very high, but I do think this adds weight to the calls that have been made for an inquiry.
Jane Patterson, our political editor, thanks so much. 6:18. Long-term mental health patient Ashley Peacock, who spent years living in a secure psychiatric unit, will be released into more community care. The Capital and Coast District Health Board has confirmed it's looking at moving Ashley to a private home in a quiet rural area where he would continue to receive extensive round-the-clock care. His parents today made an emotional plea to the Health Select Committee, asking for it to monitor their son's transition. Here's Zach Fleming with more.
Marlena Peacock's voice cracked today as she described the way her son has been treated over the past 17 years.
During the early placements, it was heartbreaking to hear him as he constantly sobbed, "I can't cope anymore." We would hug and try to keep his hopes alive.
Speaking to the Health Select Committee this morning, Marlena said Ashley was repeatedly dumped into inappropriate mental health services that were doomed to fail. Ashley, in his late 30s, has been living in restricted state care for 17 years, the past decade in a mental health unit in Porirua, at a cost of almost $1 million per year. Marlena said the most traumatic period was December 2010 to December 2013.
We would often hear heart-wrenching sobs and animal-like howls, but were prevented from making direct contact, often for weeks. And then when contact was allowed, watching him crawl around the floor with feces in his nails. The Chief Ombudsman described his treatment at the time as inhuman, cruel and degrading. This was a very difficult period for us as we felt hopeless and powerless and endured many sleepless nights.
The Capital and Coast DHB said last year Ashley was kept in seclusion because he was violent and assaulted staff. But Marlena says his seclusion started a vicious cycle that led to his violent behaviour. She said Ashley had little to look forward to.
A daily walk to the ponies 300 metres away, an allocated fortnightly van ride, and occasional trips to the supermarket. For an animal-loving, surfing-mad outdoors person, this is the most punishing of existences. And it has been punishing for us to have witnessed this and his mental and physical deterioration.
David Peacock said his son spent at least 1,000 days in seclusion out of a total of 1,095 days between 2010 and 2013. He told the Select Committee he had been given false promises for the better part of 2 decades.
We knew that a mental health institution would be quite the wrong place for a naive, anxious, autistic individual with an intellectual disability. Due to our opposition to this move, the Director of Mental Health at the time promised in an email that, and I quote, "Ashley will need and receive a bio-psych-social approach." But this never eventuated. Instead, he entered the mental health system, which almost entirely follows the medical model of treatment, which relies almost exclusively on medication and is really a one-size-fits-all approach.
Both parents said their hopes have been crushed so many times they haven't even told Ashley relocation is now a possibility. They've asked the Select Committee to monitor the Capital and Coast DHB to ensure the transition is done right. Trish Grant, the Parents IHC advocate, said otherwise there could be significant time delays.
This is too important to fail. This is his last and best chance to have an ordinary life in community.
It is hoped Ashley Peacock will have a new home by the end of the year. For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
The man accused of wounding 4 police officers during a house siege near Kawero last year says he fired shots because he felt his life was being threatened. Rhys Warren is on trial in the High Court in Hamilton on a number of charges, including 2 of attempted murder. His trial is into its 3rd week. Andrew McRae is there for us.
Rhys Warren kicked off his defence by telling the jury he mistrusts and fears the police because they've repressed Māori for 176 years.
In this day and age in Kawero, te teko, whakatane, our people get bashed by police, tasered, dogs put on them, after handcuffs, pepper spray. Even little children get pepper sprayed for no reason other than to satisfy their egos, and what's worse, they get away with it.
Mr Warren says he was caught unaware when armed police entered his home.
I was tired, I was caught by surprise, I was scared, I was frightened, and my life was threatened. I thought I was going to die.
Rhys Warren says he grabbed his grandfather's rifle and then he saw the barrel of a gun poking down the hallway. He says as soon as he saw that, he fired at it. That's when all hell broke loose.
Either with bullets coming from every direction, I hit the ground and I stayed on the ground, and then while I was on the ground, they stopped firing, and then by then I reloaded it and put the gun around the corner like that and shot.
He says he then reloaded and fired again.
I didn't see anyone or know anyone was there, and it was never my intentions for someone to get hurt.
Under cross-examination by Crown Prosecutor Aaron Perkins QC, Mr Warren was asked about a police officer being shot on the hand outside the back door of the house.
You're not suggesting he's made that up. Do you accept that he was shot in the hand?
Well, for all I know, with all the cover-ups the police have been doing, they could have made anything up.
The Crown Prosecutor put a number of texts sent and received by Mr Warren during the siege and questioned his intentions. One text to a friend said, "Come join the fun."
You've told the jury you were frightened and scared. Is that text, in your view, consistent with that? Join the fun, most welcome.
Is this the saying that we have between our culture? We got different lingos, and we have to try and act brave in front of each other. Otherwise, we look like little girls.
Rhys Warren said he didn't like the thought of going back to prison. He eventually gave himself up after just over 22 hours.
I honestly believe if it wasn't for my whānau, I would have been killed.
Once the Crown and Defence have made their closing arguments and the judge sums up, the jury is expected to go out before the end of the week. In Hamilton for Checkpoint, ko Andrew McRae-Tene.
After a 6-week shutdown, passenger train services from the west coast to Christchurch resumed this morning. The line was blocked between Cass and Springfield after a fire over Waitangi weekend damaged tracks and signalling systems. Our reporter Maya Bari, lucky old Maya, was on the first Transalpine train out of Christchurch today.
About 250 excited passengers boarded the Transalpine service at the Christchurch train station this morning. Kiwi Rail's chief executive, Peter Reedy, says it's great to have the service back up and running after a tough 6 weeks.
After a fire which went through 300 hectares, about 12 bridges damaged, one bridge had to have 10 to 12 piles replaced. It's a great day. It's a great day back, and it's a good day for New Zealand because this train does deliver good tourist dollars for New Zealand, and it's a great travel experience. So it's good to be back in business.
About 25,000 people who had booked tickets for the service but couldn't go because of the closure were offered refunds by Kiwi Rail. But the line doesn't just deliver tourist dollars, it is a vital freight link between Christchurch and Greymouth. Mr Reedy wouldn't say how much the closure has cost the business.
There was no coal exported for a period of time, and Westland Dairy couldn't move dairy products. So it was quite a big economic hit for New Zealand, an economic hit for Kiwi Rail. And it just goes to show the importance of rail, particularly in transporting difficult goods over long distances.
Any idea how much that might have cost you?
Those numbers are confidential, but for a period of 6 weeks when you're not moving traffic, the numbers were big.
Kiwi Rail's Scenic Customer Services Manager, Catherine Baker, says the number of tourists returning to the service today is a promising sign there won't be a slump in bookings.
We've got 315 capacity. We've got 245 on today, which is pretty good considering it's her first day back after the fire. Bookings have been going well over the last week when we had put it out that she was coming back today.
And tourists on board say they enjoyed the journey, despite part of the view looking a little more black and charred than usual.
It was good that it reopened today, because we had been originally booked and cancelled, and then we were very glad because it's the only day we could do it, so it was great.
Lovely, good. Come all the way down from Hawke's Bay to do this.
We did make a decision once we knew that it was open that we were going to work the end of our journey as we go back to London on Saturday, that we were going to make sure that we could do this.
And it was worth it?
Oh, definitely. We love train journeys, but this was very special.
Peter Reedy says the other important repair job for Kiwi Rail is fixing the main trunk line between Christchurch and Picton, which suffered significant damage in the Kaikoura earthquake. But he says that is a much bigger, more complex job, which isn't expected to be completed until the end of this year. For Checkpoint, Maya Burry.
I've never done the Transalpine. I'd love to do that. I'm very envious, Maya. When my little boy was little, we used to go and get on the first train that was leaving Britomart and just travel around Auckland, the most delicious treat, and get off at whatever station he felt like getting off at and go and explore. And that was just a unit in Auckland, and that was pretty exciting. We're getting lots of feedback tonight, and I want to read this, although I've just lost it because of middle age. Dear John and team, there you have it. The oil and gas geologist who said in regard to the protesters that we do live on the same planet, yet a few seconds later the oil and gas representative chairing our energy minister's announcement of further exploration for oil and gas. These people do live on a different planet, one where ethical concern for a sustainable and healthy future for us and our descendants is totally absent. We are truly stuffed. See what happens to the Arctic ice this year and then get back to me to say I'm wrong. John Munro in Wellington wrote that about Robin Martin's story about the protests outside the Petroleum conference in Taranaki. That brings us to the end of the program tonight, although we have got a lot of feedback. We'll try and just squeeze a little bit more of it in. It's been a fluid old show tonight because it began with emphatic denials from all and sundry that really anything in Ihaka and John Stevenson's book Hit and Run was correct, and it seems on the face of it to have ended with Wayne Mapp, the former Defence Minister, saying, well, actually, yeah, they did get some stuff right, including the previously emphatically and singularly denied death of civilians. All of this is unfolding. Remember, the book was only released just after 5 last night. Morning Report will have more on this tomorrow. But from the Checkpoint team, thank you for being with us. We really appreciate your company. We'll be back tomorrow at 5. Until then, a very good evening indeed.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Former Defence Minister Wayne Mapp has not denied describing a raid on 2 Afghan villages by New Zealand troops as a fiasco. The parents of mental health patient Ashley Peacock are relieved he'll be released into the community after 17 years in care. The police say there's no evidence of criminal wrongdoing involving a seclusion room at Rudu Specialist School in Invercargill. And retiring Prime Minister John Key has given his valedictory speech in Parliament. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Investigative and in-depth, Every Week Insight explores the stories that are important to New Zealanders, going beyond the headlines, sound bites and clickbait. Journalism that gives a voice to those affected and challenges those responsible. Journalists reporting from where you are and specialist correspondents. Insight just after the 8 o'clock news on Sunday morning with Wallace Chapman, or listen when you want on iTunes.